Hello and a very warm welcome to a special edition of In Retail Conversation. Science fiction writers for years have been writing about the prospect of being able to talk to devices and getting a reaction from them, maybe even controlling all of our lives. Who can forget HAL from 2001, A Space Odyssey? But I suppose three massive trends have come onto the scene in the last few years. Massive computer power, revolution in terms of voice technology, and probably us in terms of the development of devices. And those three trends have very much brought us into an age where our guests believe, Elizabeth Cherian, who's the UK Director of the Innovation Group of J. Walter Thompson, and Jeremy Pounder, who's the Futures Director from Mindshare, believe this is now the age of the speakeasy. Now, I always thought speakeasy was dubious substances in teacups, but you've just released a very interesting report called Speakeasy. What's it all about?
Well, we're actually not looking at alcohol. We are looking at voice technology, and we're really looking at its impact on consumer behavior and what the implications will be for brands.
Great. Well, my name's David Roth from WPP, and we're going to be talking about voice, the impact of voice, the challenges of voice, and the changes it's going to make our lives, both as consumers and, of course, of marketeers. The study that you've done jointly together is absolutely fascinating. We'll be giving you a URL at the end of this broadcast so you can download it, so you can read it yourself, and I highly recommend. It's a great read. Let's really start at the beginning in terms of the research that you did, because you've done some fascinating, I suppose what we would call more standard research, but also some very interesting research in terms of understanding really what people's brains are saying, not just what their minds and voice are saying.
Yeah, so we did sort of traditional market research. We have surveyed almost 7,000 people worldwide. So we've been in 9 different global markets. And in addition to that quant analysis, we've also done some face-to-face interviews. So quite a bit of qual. We did some online communities in the UK. We ran some focus groups in Shanghai and in London. We've interviewed a load of really fascinating experts from a host of different fields. And we've also worked with NeuroInsight. They are a neuroscience market research agency.
So explain a little bit about neuroscience. Probably most people watching have no idea what neuroscience is and
well,
why
it's the study of the brain, essentially. How does the brain work? It is very complex, and ultimately we don't really understand it. But they have at least mapped different regions of the brain. And so this company, NeuroInsight, is building on research that already exists. And what they're doing is knowing that certain areas of the brain work in different ways and light up, as it were, because essentially it is quite electrical. And much like an EEG, they use steady-state topography technology. And what that allows us to do is to put headsets on individuals and track their brain activity. And so we gave them lots of different tasks. And what we wanted to understand is how voice interaction compares against text or swipe. And we did so by actually watching what's happening in the brain.
What did you find then?
With regards to the neuroscience specifically?
Yes, yeah.
Well, we had done the qual and quant already. So when we went into the neuroscience bit, we sort of wanted to test some of the results that had come through. And what was really clear is that one of the drivers for using voice is that it makes you much more efficient in your life. It's a very efficient way to acquire information. And so we thought, let's see if that's actually true. Let's test that. And remarkably, it came through. There are lots of different experiments we ran, one of which really looked at how, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the research. Jeremy was actually on site seeing it in action.
Yeah, so we had 100 people come through. They spent 20 minutes carrying out different tasks. Some were quite focused around carrying out fairly pragmatic things like finding out about the weather. Some were more brand-orientated, buying products or finding directions to retail outlets. And one of the key findings, as Elizabeth mentions, is the idea that when you receive information, actually receiving it via voice is less taxing on your brain. Your brain has to work less hard to process that information.
Well, are we getting lazier?
I don't think we're getting lazy. I think we're inherently quite lazy. So I think we've always been lazy, and actually we tend to prefer the easy option in many ways. And that's why we think voice is potentially going to be very powerful, because it can give us information more simply than having to scan a screen and look through loads of search results or lots of other textual information, which is more demanding on the brain.
So before we see your vision of what future life with voice is going to look like, what's the most surprising thing that you found from the research?
I think, well, we're potentially stealing some of our own thunder here. But I think one of the standout
Just give us a snippet.
Is actually about the strength of the relationship people have with their voice assistants. And I won't give the actual precise figure or stat that we're talking about, but let's say that some of those relationships get extremely intimate, and that was quite surprising.
Something to come back for.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at your vision of what life's going to be like in a speakeasy world.
And we should have more detail in by the end of the week. Hey, Atlas, should I end many thanks or best wishes?
You know Luke quite well, so I would use best wishes.
Okay, send. Expand ad.
All new voice-activated Isla doll can help you with your homework, play your favourite music, and read you a nighttime story.
Check how many of Mia's friends already have one.
7 friends have an Isla doll, and 5 more have it on their wish list.
Can it be customised?
It is customisable and self-learning. You might also like to know it's constructed from enviro-friendly materials.
Okay, Atlas. Order one for immediate drone delivery. Mia will love it. Oh, and Atlas, preheat the oven for the cake.
Of course. I've found 637 cake recipes with your ingredients. I've selected one in particular that includes marshmallows, since Mia loves them.
Hey, you know what? I think Grandma had a cake recipe with marshmallows. I'll take it from here.
Grandma knows best.
Absolutely fascinating. Why now?
Yeah, I mean, voice technology has been around a long time. We've all had the experience dealing with an automated service agent over the phone, let's say, and it's not always been positive. But there have been really massive strides in artificial intelligence that's changing the game, quite particularly with natural language processing. That's the process where you can imagine understanding the context in language. It's really getting the subtleties. It's much more difficult.
And is that a neuroscience issue, or is that a technology programming issue?
This is a programming issue, because you can imagine all the permutations of what one can say and all the different accents and all the different situations that the computer's trying to understand. It's a question. It's data. With time, the more conversations the artificial intelligence is privy to, it will be able to understand what's happening. So it's a lot of different things. It's a question of time and in developing all that in the background. But it's not just NLP. Voice recognition is also really, really important. That's a little bit different. That's the process where speech is converted to text, because everything in the background is ultimately via text. That's how it's processing.
So still zeros and ones, is it?
Yes, unfortunately. As much as we want it to be quite a human and natural experience, in the background it is still quite black and white. And so with voice recognition, it had been, like everything, developing along, and with this big influx of, especially investment from Silicon Valley, voice recognition has now reached the point where it's at human parity with regards to accuracy. So if you were to be transcribing what I'm saying to you now, on average, you would display 5% error rate. You would get some things wrong. We listen, we might not hear something, my memory's bad. The human is right on par now with the computer, which is extraordinary. And what that means is that when you're talking to, let's say, a smart speaker, it on average, it understands what you're saying, and so that completely changes the game.
But that delta is quite amazing, isn't it? You know, the difference between going from 95% accuracy to 99. You know, 95% accuracy is pretty useless. 99% accuracy is sensational.
Well, that's exactly what Andrew Ng said. You know, he famously said that the difference is between not using it very much and using it all the time. And you know, we're at 95%. We're going to very quickly make that leap to 99, and when we do so, it's going to be a whole different ballgame.
And I suppose, and that is, I suppose, the premise of your position at the moment, which is we are about to hit that delta, and therefore this technology
it's not that far away.
is going to take off, and we as marketeers and brand owners need to know and understand how to use it.
Absolutely, they're already forecasting that half of voice will be, half of search will be via voice by 2020. I mean, that's right around the corner. So marketers definitely need to start thinking now how they're going to prepare for this new mode of interaction.
And Jeremy, is that going to be a positive thing for marketers and advertisers, that search is going to be moving from things you type to things you say?
I'm not sure if it's necessarily positive or negative. I think it's one of those trends that happens, and there will be advantages and disadvantages off the back of it, and you have to adapt accordingly. I mean, I think as we'll discuss later on, one of the key things is about how people use technology, and I think that may change as a result of voice. We think it will become simpler and more intuitive, and as a result people will use it in different locations and in different ways, and successful brands will be able to adapt to that and take advantage of that. There are potentially some big implications for some of the big tech companies, Google of course being the one that is particularly at risk, you might say, from the move to voice, with around 90% of their revenues coming from search. They're potentially quite challenged by an environment where you don't have a whole list of search results, some paid for by advertising, some organic and free. You maybe only get one result. And what the ad model is for that environment is still to be created. So I think for the tech companies and the media owners, potentially there's more of a challenge from the move to voice than necessarily for the brands, who I think are potentially more capable of adapting to that new environment.
But I suppose what everybody needs to do now is to understand this and learn and experiment and see what works for them, what doesn't.
Absolutely. I mean, the rules are being written, and part of the reason for doing this was to try and experiment in this area. And we would encourage brands to get out there and get their hands dirty, because designing for a voice interface is new for all of us. Until you actually try, you're not going to be able to come up with all the answers.
Now, Elizabeth, do you think we are entering the sort of the age of the virtual assistant?
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly helps. Smart speakers, for instance, have certainly jump-started a whole industry. And voice assistants aren't only in smart speakers. Obviously, we have Echo and Google Home, and even in China, we have things like Ding Dong. But they live in your phone. They can live in connected products. You know, we see manufacturers that range from Mattel to Ford, so dolls to cars, with voice activation being built into the very, fabric of the design. Layer on top of that connected packaging, so being able to ask your product, how it works. At CES, we saw the advent of a packaging for medicine. It's actually an injection, and so you can actually ask it, how do I inject this properly? What are the side effects? So it's really, really useful stuff, and you can just mind reels all the different things that you'd be able to talk to and ask information about, or continue that consumer journey along.
I mean, as you walk down the supermarket shelves, the packaging will be talking to you. What a scary thought.
It might be noisy, but there's all sorts of ways around that. I mean, certainly with earbuds, we can create a little bit more of a private, quiet space where you're talking to it, but actually, maybe you're hearing the information through your earbuds rather than all these different, deodorants telling you, that you should buy them.
And I think there's also a difference between you asking a product how to use it and the product
broadcasting,
assaulting you in the aisle, so to speak. And I think the latter, it seems unlikely, and I don't think people will be too happy with that.
Now, the whole notion of science fiction, Asimov probably the greatest proponent of it, of having almost a pseudo-human being that has the ability to think and has emotions and be able to provide you what you want. How do you see that playing out with some of the devices that we're seeing on the market at the moment?
Well, the manufacturers are definitely playing into that, let's say, weakness or that propensity that humans have to get attached to things, to anthropomorphize the products that are around us. And there's a whole stream of products called social robots, which are very much like a smart speaker in that it is a device. It sits on maybe a counter and it has a voice assistant embedded in it, but it is meant to be far more human-like. It moves, it usually has a face. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to make an experience that is, in its purest form, much more intuitive and natural than, you're bringing this into your home, so they want it to feel like a family member. But they're also playing on sort of, our emotional weaknesses, that we want something to be that seems like it cares about us, because ultimately, it is a piece of technology.
Now, your joint research has thrown up some very interesting trends and observations. We're not going to go through all of those, but we are going to pick up some of the highlights. So what are the highlights of the trends that you've seen from Speakeasy?
So we have 9 trends in total. We're looking at consumer behavior trends, but also trends that we believe that will really make an impact on marketing. And the 5 that we're going to talk about today are easing the cognitive load. That's really looking at how, as Jeremy talked about it before, how we found in our neuro insight work that it is inherently easier and our brain works less hard, and so we'll be, because we are humans that generally are drawn to the path of the least resistance, that it will be very attractive to people just intuitively. Outside that, we're going to look at liberation from the screen, and so just exploring what that means if you're not always looking down at your mobile phone in order to get some of the things done that you need to get done, trying to access information. If you can do so by looking up, what's going to happen when our gaze is shifted? And then we look at the digital butler phenomenon. So that's taking this idea of a pocket concierge that people talk a lot about as the mobile phone, but taking it one step further, because with a virtual assistant, all the information it can hoover up about you and then anticipate the needs you may have. How can it proactively deliver on some of those needs? And then there's craving intimacy. So with this amazing service that knows all about you and can deliver on all these needs, what kind of expectation will we have as consumers? How much of a relationship can a brand build through voice? And then finally, find your voice. So what is that voice? So you are having this conversation, literal conversation with a consumer. What's it going to sound like? How can you hit the right tone?
Great. Well, we're going to take each of those in turn. So, Jeremy, let's start off with you and look at the trend number 1, which is easing that cognitive load.
Okay, so I think we've touched upon this a little bit already. So this is really quite fundamental, we think, to why voice will be a very powerful mode of interaction. And it really is about stripping back how we currently interact with technology to the very basics of human communication. So voice as a means of communicating with one another obviously precedes writing and certainly precedes any PCs or mobiles. I think the latest estimates are that we've been using voice for about 500,000 years to communicate. Keyboards maybe 30 years, smartphones 10. So in many ways it is us...
So it's back to the future, is it?
Exactly, reverting back to a more natural way of interacting, and one would believe our preferred way of interacting. And certainly, looking at the quantitative work that we did as part of Speakeasy, the reasons why people use voice very much tap into this idea of it being the path of least resistance, it being natural, simple, intuitive. So people talk about it being just faster to use, and in particular, one of the stats is around people doing it when they feel lazy. So again, in our qualitative work, we have people talking about using it when they're lying in bed, lying on the sofa. It seems mad in some ways. They can't be bothered to type out a few letters on their phone, which ultimately isn't a very onerous task really, but actually any step that makes life a little bit easier, people generally tend to prefer. So we found that in the quantitative work. The neuroscience was a really powerful way to explore this, because ultimately it's detecting things that we can't measure ourselves, we can't talk about as consumers. So we took 100 people, as I mentioned. We asked them to carry out various tasks, and what you can see in this visualization here is what happens in the brain when people receive information. And on the left-hand side, we have people receiving that via voice through Alexa. And on the right-hand side, we have people receiving essentially the same information via text. And blue indicates low levels of cognitive activity. The red and the pink that you see on the right-hand side indicates much higher levels. And really what we think this indicates is when you receive an answer via voice, there's no distractions, essentially. You're just receiving the information that you're looking for. Whereas visual displays of information tend to have other things around them on the screen, which means that the brain is having to scan that and work out actually what's important, where's the answer I'm looking for, which ultimately is more work. So this is, we think, is really powerful evidence for this concept of easing the cognitive load. But you can see it elsewhere. So in our work in China, it came out quite strongly in some of the qualitative work we've done. And this vox pop here indicates that.
Well, let's take a look.
Yeah.
一般是休息天、周末在家，然后我不高兴就是用手，然后直接躺在那个床上或者是沙发上，然后直接用声控操作。那这样的话就是觉得就是很舒适，然后就不需要起来呀，不需要就是再去翻查什么东西的。比如说我是要买那个香皂之类的，那我就不用手打字了，因为香皂的话它会跳出来很多。就手打字的话有时候会很慢，因为搜狗的话最近更新好像打字速度很慢的，所以用语音操作的话比较方便。那它会播报第一条、第二条这种，就是基本上是什么香皂，然后多少价格什么都会播报给你。
And we're starting to see brands tap into that. It's particularly strong in China because of the nature of a character-based language being inherently harder to use as text, to type in as text.
But I think it's also China is by far the most connected country in the world, and its use of mobile technology is off the clock at the moment.
Yeah, but voice in particular is appealing there, we think, because of this challenge around using text in that.
And of course,
Baidu,
market. Example, you've got Baidu. I mean, they really have invested an amazing amount of both money, resource, and what they think their future competitive advantage is going to be with mixing artificial intelligence with voice.
Mm-hmm. So this example here is about a development called TalkType, which allows you to input information via text, but actually what's interesting about it is voice is positioned as the prominent and the main form of interaction. So it's encouraging people to go voice first with their searches above and beyond the text capabilities.
Well, as part of the study, you spoke to a number of experts in various different fields, all of them related in one way or another to the way in which voice is going to develop. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
The implications for brands in a voice world are about being very net and being very efficient in getting things done, because that's why people use voice interfaces, because it's a very efficient way of communicating.
Brands need to have names that are easy to say, and they have to have names that, when they're expressed by consumers, aren't generics, so that they do have every chance of being the brand of choice that comes out through voice activation, rather than being lost somewhere along the way.
The implications for brands for the rise of the voice are it's going to get a lot harder. It's going to get a lot more congested. The cacophony is going to be louder. It's going to be acoustic.
I think when brands and companies are thinking about their voice interfaces, they could borrow a lot from radio. We know that the best radio is simple, it's got serendipity baked into it, and it's got the human touch as well. Simplicity because you can just switch it on and it's a linear flow. Serendipity because occasionally you find things which are new to you and which may be slightly challenging to you. And the human touch because it's about a one-to-one connection with a human being that's speaking into a microphone somewhere. Now that's very difficult for a machine to achieve.
We've been using conversation as humans to communicate with each other for a long time. And that's a purely auditory experience. And a lot of the entertainment that we have, we have visual special effects and we have 3D animation. But what would it mean to kind of reduce an entertainment experience purely to that of a conversation?
Well, I feel very remiss because I've introduced both of you, but I haven't introduced Jimmy. So Jimmy is Jeremy's dog.
Yeah, Jimmy Pounder.
It must be bring a dog to work day, but we're very glad to have Jimmy on the set with us. So let's move on to trend number 2, Jeremy, the liberation from the screen.
Okay, so this is really about the concept that voice allows hands-free interaction with technology, which is one of the main reasons people find it useful in the home, in the kitchen, let's say, in the car, or even just walking down the street. And we're familiar with this idea that people are arguably excessively glued to their phones, looking down when they're walking along the road, and utterly dependent on the mobile. And we think there is this potential here that voice, because it allows people to multitask and do things simultaneously, to actually allow people to step away, as it were, from the mobile, be less dependent on that as a screen, and carry out a lot of the functionality that they have to do at the moment through a screen, without necessarily that type of interaction. And when you look at some of the tasks that people currently do, so regular voice users, the things that they're typically doing at the moment, they tend to be things that benefit from the idea of multitasking. So things that can occur simultaneously to cooking in the kitchen, or driving a car, or doing other things at the same time. And certainly people actually find it quite appealing, the idea that they won't necessarily have to be quite so glued to their phones as they find themselves at the moment. I think we see generally quite a lot of guilt, I think, around our dependency. People don't always feel so good about it. And
well, we certainly see many people getting almost run over every day.
Well, we do.
So maybe.
And in fact, in the Netherlands, interestingly, they've certainly in some cities they've put in level crossings, pedestrian crossings, rather than have the buttons and the screens at eye height. They've started putting them in the floor, so that people can see whether it's safe to cross without having to divert their gaze. So I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. But what we are seeing is around half of our sample, people using smartphones, actually find it positive that voice technology has this potential to help people look up a bit more, as it were, and actually interact with one another a bit more. You know, maybe it's a bit utopian, but certainly they're positive about this potential. And here's a picture of one of our UK respondents who talked about, actually, even within the home, the idea of being liberated from your phone is actually quite powerful. So, you know, you might have your phone in another room, and you might suddenly remember you need to do some shopping or put something in your calendar, and being able to talk to the ether, as it were, but essentially maybe a smart speaker in the home, is actually a really powerful motivator for people.
But it is interesting, actually, isn't it, that we might, you know, that the phone has been this magnetic draw for the last maybe 5-6 years. It's interesting to see that we might be moving away from the phone being the centre of gravity in terms of the way in which we get information, use information, and communicate something that is much more sort of spoken and in the ether, as you say, as opposed to a physical device.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may look back in 10, 20 years' time and see this is a period of history where we might find it quite strange, actually, the extent to which we were so utterly dependent on phones, and these pictures of people on buses and tubes and so on, utterly glued to their phones. Maybe we'll think that was a moment in time, and actually at some point we'll become a bit more fluid in terms of how we interact with technology, and less focused on one individual device.
Well, your group of experts had some very interesting things to say about this trend, so let's hear and see what they had to say.
I think the big advantage that voice has over text or graphics is that it does free people from the tyranny of the screen and the keyboard.
There are several places where voice control has obvious advantages over text or graphics on a screen. We are seeing touch screen interfaces come into car dashboards, but some drivers are slightly nervous about looking away from the road to tap on an icon. So I think voice control could save the day here.
The advantages of voice have to be that it is the most intuitive way that we can interact.
I think voice has an advantage over text because it's very easy to get something done So if I'm sat at home, I can issue a command across the room without getting up to find my phone or press a button.
Well, Elizabeth, the next trend is one that I wholeheartedly endorse. I've always wanted a Butler ever since I was about 3. Sadly, never managed to have it. I'm going to have it now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think you're not alone, and so here we are today with the virtual assistant, with digital assistants, and really ones that are voice activated. You can have that and more.
Wonderful.
Yes.
How's it going to work?
Well, I think the important thing is, we talked a lot about how it can really help you and deliver on some of the utility and needs in our lives. But I think what's really important is because it is powered by artificial intelligence, and the way it works is it hoovers up all that data we talked about. And so it can understand so much about you and remember, especially as it really develops, start to remember, your preferences and your likes, and it has more at its fingertips than we can even imagine. And
is this where sort of voice intercepts with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, really, voice technology is a facet of AI. It's one of the many things that, AI is just really an umbrella term. And so it's this idea of machine learning that you put along with the voice recognition and then NLP that it really starts to get something really powerful. And so, for example, with like your smartwatch, you may ask Siri, okay, what's the weather going to be? What's the weather now? And they'll say, oh, it's partly cloudy. And he can then go on to say, well, not only that, but it's going to turn cloudy and rainy later in the afternoon, so you might want to bring your umbrella.
Yeah,
so
and that is the difference, between data and useful data and helpfulness and the edge of being human.
Yeah, it's seeing that bigger picture, understanding you might be interested.
Context,
yeah, absolutely. That you will be, commuting home later in the afternoon, and you might want to know what the weather will be like, not just now, but later, especially if it's going to change in an adverse way. And this is not just we talked a lot about Siri, and this is beyond. This is a phenomenon that is worldwide. There is the Baidu, we talked about Baidu earlier, a voice assistant called Doer, and it is extraordinarily smart. And this guy's talking about how it helps his wife to pick out outfits. I mean, it has the potential to be giving suggestions and even taking actions on people's behalf. And strikingly, that's what people want. We are so busy. It is a tech-charged lifestyle we all lead, and if technology can take some of that friction out and start helping us make some decisions that potentially we're not interested in making ourselves, it's really, really attractive to a lot of people.
So I can have my cake, eat it, and have my Jeeves at the same time.
Yes.
Now, this isn't sort of theoretical in a sense. You've been doing some work with clients creating a mix of visual, voice and artificial intelligence. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, we teamed up with Beijing Linglong Tech, and they are the manufacturers of the Ding Dong, which is very similar to the Amazon Echo. It looks very similar. It's tall and sort of oblong. And it is a voice assistant housed in a smart speaker. And we've developed a couple of products for some of our clients in Asia, one of which is a product for a hotel client, and it is taking this idea literally, this idea of the concierge. So this idea that you might need help in the home, but what would it look like if you had help in your hotel room 24/7? And not only a concierge role, but also one where it has all that background information so that you can ask it all sorts of things. It knows past behavior and can deliver on potential future problems.
Fantastic. Well, let's take a sneak look at what this product has the potential to be.
Concierge support and dialing for room service are the most common needs of hotel guests. The problem is these are human-operated services that are not available all the time. Introducing Golden Keys. Powered by AI, Golden Keys is a voice-activated skill that integrates concierge and room services, acting as a holistic in-room assistant.
Hi, Golden Key， 我是不是开会要迟到了？
你的会议是在上午9点30。根据现在的交通状况，你可以在25分钟内到达。
Hey, Golden Key， 可以查一下这周篮球赛的门票吗？
当然。 我刚刚把选项发到你的邮箱了，加油
Golden Key can even schedule in-house services like room maintenance, food delivery and laundry, to name a few, functioning as an in-depth CRM platform by understanding the guest's preferences and behaviors.
Hi, Golden Key， 我还需要订一个明晚的餐厅，找一些气氛不错的地方。 我想给茱莉亚一个难忘的印象。
日本寿司，对吗？
是的，她很喜欢寿司。你怎么知道？
很简单，查一下你的猫头鹰行程单就知道了。
With Golden Key, luxury hotels will provide every guest with their own automated, on-demand, intelligent butler.
Well, it's not just in China that we're doing things like this across the WPP group. We've got our own Alexa app for Brand Z. Let's take a look at how that works as well.
Hello, I'm Brands Rosie. Thanks for your interest. Can I ask your name?
David.
Nice to meet you, David. Would you like to talk about this year's Global Brands Top 100 Brands?
Yes, please.
That's great. Where would you like to start? Maybe look at a particular brand.
Tell me about Amazon.
Would you like to know about the Amazon brand performance in 2017?
Yes, please.
Amazon is positioned at number 4 with a value of $139,286. Its brand contribution is 4. Brand value percentage change 2017 versus 2016 is 41% and rank change is 3.
Thanks very much.
You are very welcome. Why not stay up to date with new BrandsBot developments as they happen and join our mailing list?
Excellent, yes.
That's great. We'll be in touch soon.
Alexa, you know Jeff better than anybody else. What is his intention for Whole Foods?
Sorry, but if I told you that, I would have to kill you.
Well, Elizabeth, perhaps the next trend is the most surprising of all of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, we call this craving intimacy, and it goes without saying, if you have this device that is really helping all the time, you're going to get attached to it. It's going to be very useful, and you're going to depend on it. Now, the degree to which this is progressing is sort of the interesting bit. I mean, almost three quarters of smartphone users across the globe have told us that they really want some, especially if it sounds human and is interacting with me in an intuitive way. They really want to use it. It's quite attractive to them, and that makes sense. You know, if it's the more human-like it is, the more you're going to make it'll feel like that real concierge downstairs in your hotel. And so what we found is that while interacting in your brain, you know, we want to test this with our neuroscience research, is that as you have these interactions, an emotional response is actually proven to be firing. And now that's true also if you look at text. I mean, anytime you're searching for a solution and you come to the end and you get what you're looking for, you of course feel good about that. And so you can see that in the brain, that you're having a positive response to getting that information you're seeking. But what was interesting is when you compare voice to text, that emotional response, that potential to feel attached to whatever it is that's giving you that information is twice as strong.
And that you think has a big impact going forward for brand building?
Well, yeah, because why wouldn't you want twice the impact? Why wouldn't you want someone to feel twice as good about whatever it is you're delivering? And you know, what it will do is ultimately build more attachment, we think. You know, if it feels good, even if it's something that is subconscious, it's like, you know, an addiction. You're going to be more drawn to it.
I think one of the challenges will be this idea of the assistant as the gatekeeper, because potentially this emotional response might be primarily to this digital butler, this assistant who's becoming ever more useful and entrenched in your life. And if you have such a strong relationship with that particular assistant, a brand, whatever you want to call it, then that is in a particularly powerful position to choose which other brands actually come into your life in any shape or form. So that in a way, the stronger your relationship is with the assistant, potentially the weaker it might become with other brands on the periphery, apart from potentially the ones that the assistant thinks are the ones that you really value and have a strong relationship with.
And that's something we're all going to have to battle with, work through and find out what the relationships are likely to be. Perhaps the most surprising, worrying statistic is...
Yeah, because with that, you know, with active voice tech users already, we're seeing that nearly a third have had a sexual fantasy. And that probably is shocking to most. It certainly was a big surprise to us.
I don't know what to think.
You know, you see movies like Her, and we've been playing with this idea and imagining this time in the future when technology will be so intuitive and so human, like, and so great, and it will sound like Scarlett Johansson, how lovely, and what that will do for our imaginations and our cravings. I think outside the extreme, the kernel that's interesting in that phenomenon is that we get attached to things and we want to form these sort of more emotional bonds and we're willing to form bonds with technology, especially if they're useful and acting in parts of our lives that make our lives easier.
Microsoft is also making a big play in this area, as
Absolutely.
indeed are all the tech companies. In China, they're up to some interesting things. What are they doing?
Well, in this case, with their chatbot on WeChat, the messaging platform, they have choice.
And WeChat is completely ubiquitous in China. Everybody uses WeChat several times. It feels like several times a second in China, but
yeah, and it's one of the reasons why voice is so strong in China, and it has been for a long time, because WeChat really embraced voice, and we talked about the character-based language and why it was, there was that impetus to adopt voice as well. And so WeChat is not, voice is not foreign to WeChat, but what's interesting with the choice chatbot that's on WeChat is that it's tracking all these conversations people are having with it. And it's a good example of a voice-activated chatbot, because most chatbots are text-based, and people are using it and they're falling in love with it. I mean, a quarter of the 40 million registered users have said, "I love you" to her. It's extraordinary, and it's obviously working.
That is extraordinary.
It's working in their favor.
That's something that we should be pleased about, but it is certainly extraordinary.
It is. Well, they're happy with the experience, so that's one win for Microsoft.
So you've done some Vox Pops.
We have, yeah. We've talked to loads of different people, and in this one, which is even more shocking, maybe, is this lady talking about really comparing her experience in the car, her relationship with Siri as compared to her husband, and which she prefers. So.
Well, I'm not certain I really want to see this, but let's see it anyway.
Don't show your wife.
我喜欢有一个语音助手带路，因为男朋友、老公在旁边，他永远是指责你的。你这个车开得不好，你怎么可以踩刹车？你应该减速，应该怎么样，非常烦。我一般开车，什么人都不要在我旁边，我自己开就可以了。然后的话，语音助手他会是陪我聊天的，他不会指责我，他是一种调节气氛，然后说笑话给我听。我问他漂不漂亮，他会跟我说你是最漂亮的，对不对？我问我老公漂不漂亮，脑子有病吧？
And we wanted to take that even one step further, and so we're working with one of our clients in China and trying to see what kind of role. So obviously, a voice assistant can play a role that's preferable to even some really important people in your life. So what other roles could we use voice assistants to hold? And one of which we explored is the nanny in the house. And so this is one of our healthcare clients, and looking at how a nanny, a virtual nanny, could be potentially helping to avoid sickness and diagnose problems.
So a real Nanny McPhee then.
Yeah.
Let's take a look.
In China, medical support often falls short in servicing the needs of patients, especially in those seasons when occurrences of fever is high. This demand of patients outstrips all available resources, creating cluttered hospitals and high pressure on doctors and nurses. Introducing Bibo, an express solution for children's care. Here's how it works. A voice-activated skill that will respond to you during times of illness by providing basic medical guidance.
Hey Bibo, 我觉得小杰好像不舒服，他一边头痛一边流汗。
确实是发烧症状，我建议去医院之前先喝美林。我能现在为你订药送到家。
那太棒了，谢谢 Bibo。
Bibo is also useful to connect to EC Drug Express Delivery, or, if symptoms are serious, even professional services, like Cherian WeChat platform. Bibo can detect early symptoms to prevent a fever developing further.
小杰在过去的3小时内频繁咳嗽， 我建议您快给他测个体温。
谢谢 Bibo， 我现在就去测。
Potentially, it could be paired with other devices, like the iWatch, to get even more healthcare information. Bibo is an on-demand, 24/7 triage nurse recognizing symptoms, so treatment can be delivered early and fast.
Well, let's also now hear from the experts that you interviewed around this theme as well.
Audio touches you as a human. So what's exciting about voice control is what's always been exciting about radio. It's a human thing.
To try and make computers be more like us so that we can talk with them more naturally. It is interesting when something acts naturally and human back to you, how much we imbue it with sentience, with human personality. And so I think that's going to be interesting to see how that goes as computers become more able to communicate with us naturally. How we look at them and how we think of them is going to be very interesting, I think. Yeah.
So Jeremy, for the final theme, the theme of finding your own voice.
Yeah, so this is really all about the need, we think, for brands to start thinking about how their voice sounds to people. So we've talked over many years about brand tone of voice, but often that's meant, the language that's used, it's quite textual really, rather than literally the sound. But we think increasingly brands are going to have to think very hard about what do they sound like, and are they male, are they female, do they have a strong regional accent, are they young, are they old?
I mean, that's a very intriguing question for a brand to have to answer after all these many years, because most brands probably haven't even thought about it. Are they male, are they female? As you say, regional accents, what is it?
Or are they actually one size fits all, or do they potentially personalise the sound of that voice to different people, and even over the course of a relationship, maybe the tone of voice is quite straightforward to begin with, but becomes more relaxed and informal as there are more interactions with someone. So, I mean, there's all sorts of layers of sophistication that potentially could be applied, but just even to begin with, as you say, is it male or female? Does it have a certain accent or not? Are things that will have to become quite prominent in people's thoughts in the pretty near future, if not now.
And what implications do you think that has for us as marketeers and brand owners in terms of having to have another dimension in terms of how they define what their brand is all about?
I'm not sure it's another dimension as such, or more of an extension of the values and the personality that people believe, or marketeers certainly believe their brands have already. And it's more about a translation of that, which is about a character and a personality into another medium, if you like.
But is the brand's manifestation, in a sense, into a pseudo-human form? Which is a new skill set, I suppose we're going to have to learn.
Absolutely. How that is done creatively is going to be incredibly challenging, and we will all, no doubt, experiment, and there will be failures and disasters along the road. But hopefully over time we'll learn some of these principles. But certainly from what we're seeing from our research is that people do actually want and believe brands should have a voice and a personality. So the consumer need is there, and they think it should be distinct from the voice of the assistant. So if you think about Alexa at the moment, or Google Assistant, most of the interactions are via the assistant, and actually a lot of Alexa's skills are delivered by Alexa rather than by the brand itself in terms of the voice. And I think that should change.
And do you think that's something that Amazon and Google will want to encourage, or do you think they'll want to keep the voice of Alexa, the voice of Google Home the same?
I think ultimately both Amazon and Google, certainly in the intermediate future, want it to be a successful experience. So I think if they can create an ecosystem where people are using it and getting value from it, and that is derived from brands having their own voice, then absolutely they'll support that. And there'll always be quite tightly defined tasks around the home, turning on the lights, finding out about the weather, which will be through the actual assistant itself. So there's always going to be a strong relationship there anyway, I think.
Well, let's take a look at what some of the people that you interviewed said.
它的声音是可以是 像西门子一样的这种比较稳重、成熟的这种企业的这种感觉，然后那个可能是有一种长辈式的这种声音，在我工作或学习或者是人生当中碰到一些挫折的时候，我把它虚拟成一个老者，那跟他交互的时候，他给我的一些提醒或者一些忠告或者一些是方法，来好告诉我应该是怎么走下去。那这个位置的时候，他是互换角色了，而不是比较年轻的声音，而是一个像西门子一样的沉中稳健的一个老。
So one of the key things we found from the neuroscience work, which is really the foundation for a lot of this thinking, is really that when people actually say a brand name, talk directly to a brand, there's double the emotional reaction than when they carry out the same task via text or via typing. So what we think this indicates is that the act of saying a brand name elicits a lot of the associations that you've built up over many years, maybe your whole life, about what that brand means to you and what it stands for. And actually saying Coca-Cola, saying Starbucks, what have you, is a much stronger way to trigger those memories than typing out the same brand name or tapping on an icon on the screen. So we think this is really powerful evidence for the idea that voice is going to be a strong platform for brands.
And do you think that's a powerful incentive for brands and marketers to be pushing their foot on the accelerator of making voice work for them?
Well, certainly for the stronger brands. I mean, I think if you're a real powerhouse brand and you know that people have a strong relationship with you, then creating these voice experiences is a strong way to reinforce those associations. I think one of the challenges will be in the future, which is not unique to voice, is how do you launch a new brand, or what if you're a kind of a middling brand that actually people don't have those strong relationships with? But that's not unique to voice by any means.
Well, let's take a look at our final look at what your panel of experts had to say around this topic as well.
I think advertising in a voice-led world is going to be challenging because we already struggle to make our voices heard, and if all brands are voices, that's going to be very interesting.
I think advertising in a voice-controlled world is really interesting, and it will have to borrow a lot of the lessons from radio. Radio's been advertising for decades now, and we've learnt a lot about what works. Things that are personal, things that are human, things that are funny, but crucially things that are embedded in the flow of the output, things that are very appropriate to the context.
I think the voice-activated world is quite a challenge for advertising, because I can't see really how brands can build brand equity through those sorts of channels. It's going to be much more about triggering equity. So to me the challenge is not so much an advertising one as a marketing one, about making sure your brand is as salient as possible in the minds of consumers.
Is there a role for advertising in a voice world? I don't know. It feels like it would be very weird to have an interface over an Amazon Echo.
Trying to entertain, doing something more than just doing a web search for you and repeating the result, then characters is critical. And obviously, you know, that's what I did at Pixar, and Oren Jacob, my fellow co-founder, that's what he worked at Pixar. It's all creating great story. It's creating great characters that you resonate with, and you want to follow their journey. You love, you know, Toy Story because of the characters of Buzz and Woody. They're different characters and they work well together. But if they were just bland, averaged, like no personalities, they would not be engaging, and the film would not be engaging as well. So from the very founding of Pulsing, we believe that it's critical to express personality in our AIs. And that's why we have writers, we have actors who craft our experiences.
Well, I can't believe we've almost come to the end of our special conversation but it's impossible to have a conversation without having some conclusions to those. What do you draw as the key conclusions from the work that you've done, the people that you've spoken to, and the way in which you think that this technology is going to impact us as marketeers and brand owners?
Well, I think there's a number of different areas to think about. I think first and foremost, we talk about the idea of a voice user interface, a VUI, if you like, replacing the the graphical user interface to some degree, and how the rules and principles about how you design an experience when often there isn't a screen are going to have to be developed and learnt. And in many ways, this idea of conversational interactions, which is not unique to voice, is also about chatbots and text interactions. I think brands are going to have to start experimenting to really get a sense of what those principles might be. So, people talk about the idea of turn-taking in human conversation. So as we've been having a conversation, you'll say something and then you'll pause and let me say something, and so on and so forth. So when brands are designing these voice experiences, they're going to have to think about some of those human unwritten rules, if you like, about how they design those things. Things like pauses as well. Having a pause from the brand indicates that the brand's thinking, or people perceive that to be the idea of thought. So thinking about how you interject pauses, as well as, of course, all the language that you use. All these things are things that need to be experimented with and to really understand how they're going to work. That's certainly one area.
Another area is figuring out what are these, we talked a little bit about micro moments, because, like the respondent in London who talked about how when she's walking around her house, oftentimes she doesn't have her phone in her pocket. And what's those moments when you think, oh, I need to replenish whatever my toothpaste, or oh, I need to put that on my list, or the things that we sort of think to do to ourselves. And if we don't have a way of purchasing that toothpaste right away, or making that note to ourselves, we forget. And so finding that tiny little moment that it seems, micro or insignificant, it really can make a difference in someone's life. It really makes them feel more efficient and on top of their daily lives, and ultimately can mean more revenue for the brand itself.
I think we also, we've talked about this idea of the digital butler, which is mostly about the assistant being proactive and anticipating need. I think the opportunity for brands, and it is certainly challenging and not that easy, is to try and think about that proactivity themselves, and try and identify the micro moments that Elizabeth's talking about, but think about how they can, rather than wait for someone to come and talk to them and say, I need X, Y, or Z, try and anticipate those moments. And it's a principle that applies across all sorts of areas of digital marketing, that's going to become more and more critical going forward. But I think it particularly applies to voice when we see these relationships building and being quite strong and intense.
With any new adoption of technologies, there's winners and losers. There's current players in the game who've got a lot to lose, new players who've got an open playing field. Who is this technology going to impact the most? I'm sort of thinking very much about the likes of Google, who make a lot of money out of creating a whole list of potential search answers, whereas voice is going to be maybe one or two.
Well, I mean, certainly it is a big challenge for Google, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I think we need to remember that we're not going to be entering a pure voice landscape in the immediate future, at least. So that even with voice searches or voice interactions with Assistant, there will be this opportunity for some screen delivery of results. So Google talk about the idea of a multimodal environment where maybe some interactions are purely voice, but some also have a screen. Now, if there is a screen there as well, then there is still the opportunity to display more than one result, and potentially an evolution of the current ad model with paid-for results and organic results. So there's that element of the business which we think will have some continuity, if you like, from where we are now. The challenge is in a pure voice environment where potentially there's only one result. I mean, certainly the work we've done suggests that people aren't really prepared to listen to a series of results and have sponsored interjections through those results. One thought and one theory that we talk about in the report is the idea that we might potentially evolve to more of an affiliate type model. So that in the same way as currently we might use a money supermarket to try and find finance results, and the brand will essentially pay a commission, if you like, to the aggregator, we could see Google emerge, or Google Assistant emerge, as this kind of meta aggregator of information, and essentially all brands or anyone who wants to be discovered and surfaceable through the Assistant would need to pay some kind of commission. So what is now paid search might become a distribution cost of the future. So that's one thought, one evolution. Certainly Google haven't gone public with any thoughts about how the world might evolve, but it is absolutely a big challenge for them.
Well, I think we've come to the end of our In Conversation. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating, this part of the journey, but this is only the beginning of the journey, certainly not the end of it. One final thought from both of you. You know, if you had a crystal ball and you could predict what's going to happen maybe 5-10 years out in terms of how this is going to impact our lives, how would you sum it up? Elizabeth?
Well, I think it's going to impact our lives tremendously. I really do believe that it is an easier form of interaction, and people will resort or revert to voice before text in lots of instances. And I like to believe that it will foster more human interaction. I think we are at a sort of tipping point where, you know, this magnetism that you talked about to the phone is going to dissipate, that we are going to start looking up or are going to be interacting in a more intuitive way. And there may be a bit of cacophony, you know, if we're all talking to all these products around us and what have you. But I think that even if that is vaguely negative, because I think there'll be ways to manage that, I think the upswing is so much greater. You know, what can we do? And especially for marketers, what can they do with people's attention now that it's shifted up?
Jeremy?
I guess my thoughts would be that we're going to see a sense of omnipresent and omniscient, if you like. So we're going to have these assistants that we interact with quite fluidly across multiple touch points, multiple screens, multiple environments, and the knowledge that they're going to have is going to be quite incredible. And what we've touched upon here in this idea of digital butler being proactive, I think the extent to which that happens and what it will look like in 5 years' time will be, as I say, quite incredible.
Well, Elizabeth Cherian, the UK Director of the Innovations Group for JWT, thank you very much indeed. Jeremy Pounder, the future director of Mindshare, thank you very much indeed. It is a fascinating report. I absolutely recommend that you download it from the URL given here, and here also the email addresses of both Elizabeth and Jeremy that you can contact for more information. Well, from me, from David Roth at WPP, thank you very much indeed for watching, and look forward to you watching on another occasion of In Conversation With. Thanks very much indeed, and have a great rest of the day.